Today we're going to take a look at this Cascade Communication Corporation Control Processor 50. This is a card that installs in a PBX. If you're not familiar with PBXs, they're basically what give buildings extensions on their phones. It's something that can route calls, handle voicemail, that sort of thing. This particular card seems to be the main processor module for a large PBX. And it also appears to be what holds all the voicemail data. This will digitally store voicemails on this 520 megabyte hard drive, which is actually a PCMCIA hard drive, which is kind of neat. This is actually broken, unfortunately, so we'll probably open that up in a bit. And yeah, the main reason why I bought this thing is because of these babies. Intel i960s, two of them. Now, the i960 is probably not something most people are familiar with since they were not very popular. They are RISC-based CPUs that Intel made to compete with the likes of DC Alphas, IBM PowerPC, that sort of thing. They wanted to enter the RISC market. They started with an older one, the IX 432 or something like that, and it failed miserably. Then they went to the Intel i860 and then the 960. Now the 960 was the most popular out of them all, surprisingly, and it actually saw use in a bunch of RAID controllers and a few other things. I have seen things come by my way with Intel 960s, whereas the 860, nothing. There's a few things that use it. In fact, I have a very special card coming from a supercomputer with multiple i860s on it. But that's pretty much all, like, the only place you're going to find them. They're really hard to find usually. When they're on eBay, 860s are really expensive usually. Usually in like the $50 range. This is what they look like, exactly the same as the 960. And you can see they just have a kind of standard socket. Large amount of gold in these, which is why they are so expensive. I mean, that and they're collector's items, because the 860s especially are quite rare. But they're often, if they're cheap, they're often picked up for gold scrap, unfortunately. And the 960s, I actually purchased one a long time ago, and you can see it's in a pretty dismal shape because I decapped it. So using just my my Canon 100mm macro and an extension tube, I got a couple die shots of it. I want to get a microscope. I can't get close enough with this thing. I do have a USB microscope, and it does get much closer, but the image quality is so poor. So, yeah, I'm kind of eyeing a $700 microscope. So, we'll see. Maybe. I do have my Canon 7D on eBay, and that looks like it's going to sell for a decent amount of money. So I may pick up a nice microscope, one that I can attach this camera to and take very, very high quality, very up close photos of CPU dies. But in the meantime, yeah, I have kind of average photos, which is why I hold on to these, because I don't want to get rid of them, because I have this mentality of, well, if I get rid of it now, I won't be able to take better pictures when I get a real setup later. So I also decapped this guy, which is an ancient microcontroller made by NEC. I have a couple that are in better shape, although not great. I got another small collection of ceramic CPUs and other chips in the mail the other day from eBay. It came in at a reasonable price, like $30 or something. This one especially is pretty neat. I mean, look at that thing. AMD, back in the day, and some Motorola chips, and the usual assortment of neat things. Anyway, getting back to this actual control processor, on the front, I mean, this is clearly just a card that slides in. There's a big connector at the back. This has good marginal and fault LEDs. I like how it's just got marginal. And it's also got another set of good and, failed, I should say, instead of fault. There's also another set of good and failed LEDs here. Now, what I find funny is this doesn't actually tell you which one, like what these are for. It just says, it's failing, but okay, you need to know that it failed, but what information is it giving me if this one's failed or this one? I need to know if there's the hard drive has failed, which is an easy replace, or if like the motherboard has failed and you have to replace the whole thing. So yeah, I'm sure it explains this in the manual. It just seemed kind of silly to have such a vague set of LEDs on it. There's also a couple dip switches back here. Don't know what they do. There's also a redundancy status set of LEDs, which I'm guessing if you have a twin module installed next to it, it'll light up to the right or the left to indicate that you're set up to, it'll take over when this thing fails. But the board is very densely packed. These Intel 960s are decently powerful. They're actually completely different models. This is the CF series, this is a 33 megahertz version, and this is the HD series, which is this one is a 66 megahertz version. I believe they're pin compatible, but they're not actually compatible in the sense that you can't just pull this out and put in the HD. The HD is the more powerful version. I think it's got larger caches and stuff like that, but they're essentially just revised versions of each other. They're the same basic thing. This blown up one is a CA series, another 33 megahertz part, but they should all be more or less the same internally, with the exception of the newer ones, which have a larger cache, so they'd probably have more die space. I think they're actually a smaller process too. That's one of the refinements they made. So one thing on this board that is kind of very noticeable is that there's all these different types of memory on the board, and they all seem to be arranged in different banks. Like this seems to be like probably the core working memory. This is probably memory for like the secondary chip, which is doing who knows what. And then you have these, which could be handling the incoming voicemails. No idea. I haven't really done too much looking for manuals and stuff on this thing since, well, what's the point? I can't actually plug the thing in or anything. I don't have a PBX at home. So, we'll just take a look at the stuff on this thing. This is it appears to be a bought-in card, and it's very tough to get off. And this is actually an Ethernet controller made by Sonic, and it's a real pain to get off. I don't think this is meant to be replaced on a daily basis, just because it's just a very large 0.1 inch header. I mean, look at that. It's like 50 pins or something. And yeah, it just seems to be an Ethernet controller. And and it even says LAN adapter, Cascade Communication Corp. I guess is not bought in after all. But what I find funny on this is that it's an Ethernet controller and there's no Ethernet ports. So it must be an internal connection between the backplane and some Ethernet port somewhere on whatever device this card plugs into. While we're here, we'll take a look at the back. Nothing. Just passives. All decoupling caps and resistors, and that's it. Just passives. Not a single thing. It has a pair of very large connectors. This one's smaller, but this one especially is huge. And at the front, it's simply these little pull-out things to give it a little nudge forward when you're removing it, and it's got little thumb screws to hold the card in. The CPU area of the board, there's the 66 megahertz version. If we move along a little bit, there's an Altera Flex FPGA. Pretty beefy looking one. And then we got the 33 megahertz i60 960. And moving along, we have tons of support chips. Now these are probably all PALs or maybe small FPGAs. And one thing you'll notice on this thing, okay, so we've got Altera, Actel, Xilinx, and I can't remember where I saw it. It's here somewhere, but I did see some lattice semiconductor stuff. So we pretty much have every single FPGA, well, at least major FPGA manufacturer, all showing their faces on this single product. Probably because this is built up over the years from different designs. There's a big bank of memory here. This looks like it's 120 is probably DRAM, made by, who is that again? Trident, I think. Oh no, sorry, Alliance. And got some Phillips chips there. These might be line drivers of some type. And moving along, we have these 72-pin SIMs. And, oh man, these SIM slots are very tough. Unknown. I don't know what that one is. I will look this up, and if I get an answer, I'll put it here. I don't think it's 32 meg. It's only 2 DRAM chips. What does it say on this? That's probably the internal part number. So there's that type, and then it looks like all the other ones are this particular one. Again, it says 32G, so that's not going to be the size. So these are made by Texas Instruments. There are those lattice chips. A few gals. There's a RS-232 port here. This must be for diagnostic stuff because I'm pretty sure when this is in with another card next to it, there's no way you could have anything plugged into that. There's also a chip here, which appears to be some EEPROM for the gals, would be my guess. As expected, it's a small Altera branded FPGA configuration memory. Unfortunately, my programmer can't read this. Anyone know if this is a compatible chip to something else, like something standard, or if it's purely a custom memory part from Altera? But either way, I can't read it as is. There's a handful of these chips scattered around the board now. They all have stickers, so that tells you that it's probably something programmable. And it turns out they are Altera CPLDs. There's like 4 or 5 of them scattered around the board. Basically, this whole board seems to be just an array of programmable logic. FPGA, we got some here, 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 here. That's another one, I think, over here. Like, it's just a sea of it with a couple CPUs running the show. I mean, this thing's probably doing most of its stuff like in FPGA hardware. So it's you know, very fast and streamlined, but clearly it's built up over a bunch of designs because they've got all these different manufacturers and totally different models. They probably could have consolidated this, but they're probably not too worried about board space. So they're using a bunch of smaller devices instead of 1 or 2 large, you know, Alteras or something. 2 of these rather large Dallas DS1270s are on the board. These are non-volatile SRAM, as you can see from the, the little description. Unfortunately, these are another set of chips that my reader won't read. I don't know if it's very common for chip readers to be able to read these non-volatile SRAMs, but I figured, hey, you know, why wouldn't it be able to? I'm sure I could look up a generic SRAM chip and read from it, but you know, I'm not too concerned. It's just going to be like the time and stuff like that, assuming the batteries aren't dead, which they probably are, considering this board is from the 90s. And moving up here, we got this large Cirrus Logic chip, which is upside down, and it turns out this huge chip is simply a PCMCIA controller to allow it to interface to the hard drive. Yep. All that board space. And you've got a bunch more gals. These are Altera, probably CPLDs, maybe small FPGAs. Probably RS-232 stuff up here. And you can see there's space for some high density connectors along here. There's another one down here. And other than that, it's just a very densely packed, no doubt ridiculously expensive board. I mean, you know, not military levels of absurdity, but pretty expensive. There's also a couple LEDs, a very large 5mm red one and a teeny tiny green one, and probably a programming port, possibly for the SRAM, I'm not sure. So I think it's time we take a look at this hard drive. All right, now for the 520 megabytes of storage. This is a PCMCIA Type 3 card. Type 2 cards are about that thick, and Type 1 cards are even thinner. There's some unofficial Type 4 cards that exist, but they're not part of the real spec. This is a fairly light, but all metal construction. Well, it's modern enough to call it a PC card, even though they call it a PCMCIA card. PC card is kind of like the newer term for these things. They just have a standard connector, which I believe is just a ID connector. Or no, I think it's based on the ISA slot. And the newer PC cards, the 32-bit ones, are called card bus. You can always tell it's a card bus slot because they'll have a gold contact here along the top of the connector. They're 32-bit and they're based on PCI, regular PCI. So I've tried hooking this up with an adapter and it does not want to work. So using a ridiculously small Torx number 2, let's see if we can get this hard drive apart and just take a look at it. See how many platters we've got in there. Probably just going to be 2 platters, if that. Although it is a Type 3 card, so they might have squeezed some more in. Nice bit of machined metal here. You can see all the marks from the CNC. And there we go. It is just 1 platter. And read-write head, spins, fingerprint smudges, all those good things. Small controller. And if we can get to the, should be able to get to the PCB, which should be hiding behind here. Oh, I was thinking this was all one piece of metal because there's no gap here, but it looks like it's just wrapped around this edge. Yep. There we go. Oh yeah, quite a bit of control circuitry in here. Lovely stickers. Oh, is that a Z80? Oh no, it's a DSP. Oh, that's kind of disappointing. Zilog makes something other than Z80s. One thing to watch out for when you're taking apart hard drives, especially laptop ones, because laptop ones tend to use this more than others, is that sometimes the platter is not metal. It's actually glass with the magnetic material attached to it. And if you're sitting there, you're just kind of prying it out of the thing, if you're just disassembling it for the hell of it, trying to get magnets out, whatever, you can actually shatter this and shards of glass go everywhere. A lesson I found out one day when I was at home taking apart an old 2.5-inch SCSI hard drive, and it just went like that, and it went psh, and luckily it did not blind me. But yeah, don't do that at home. That is the teeny tiny read-write head, and if you want some size comparison, this is a Phillips number 1 screwdriver. So already a somewhat small screwdriver, and that is tiny. And this isn't even a modern drive. Obviously modern drives have much smaller read-write heads. Just taking a quick look at this Ethernet card. It is a Sonic Ethernet controller, 1992 copyright. Magnetics. So this small connector is actually where the Ethernet data is going. It looks like it's just being routed through this, separate to all the other digital signals. Passives on the back, support chips, just some memory. And look, a whole bunch more gals. Oh, they didn't populate a bunch of them. It's kind of weird. I'm not sure what else would go on this that they would need the additional stuff. There's one minor bodge here, 20 megahertz crystal. The usual. Tucked onto the back here is this little Max 225, which is a multi-port serial driver. And it's on a little secondary PCB. I don't know if this is actually a socket of some type. It looks like there's a row of pins here. So I think this might actually be in a socket of some type. But we'll break it off either way. Oh no, it's actually attached to a chip. Rip this off the board and find out. Oh, huh. That's weird. It actually has formed leads like a regular package. But there's nothing underneath it. It's just this footprint for a different IC. So this is basically just an adapter board. Although it does have a capacitor and two capacitors, capacitor resistor. And yeah, it's just like a little mini adapter board. That's quite funny. And, you know, it wouldn't be that unusual, but what I find funny is that the leads are bent out into a surface mount thing instead of socketed or just like piggybacked onto something. That's kind of unusual. Sorry if this is kind of an uneventful, well, we'll call it a teardown, even though it's not really. Well, I guess we teared down the hard drive. But it's kind of uneventful because it's just a board, albeit a very, densely packed, moderately interesting board. But to be honest, I really just bought this thing to get these out of it. This board's really useless. It's not even something that is collectible. It is just useless. It's just a good way to get some chips, some gold Intel 960s. They tend to use lots of Motorola chips and kind of exotic Intel chips in communications hardware. So if you're looking around eBay, you can often just look through the telecommunications stuff and you'll find tons and tons of these boards up for sale. Now, a lot of people seem to think that they're worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars. They are not. No one is ever going to buy them, and yet they will sit there and keep these things on eBay for $400 for no reason. I paid probably $30 for this, and that would be the cost of just one of the two Intel chips if I wanted to get them. So it's not a bad deal. You can also get Motorola 68060s on these things. And 060s are usually pretty expensive, but you can get these fairly cheap with an 060. You just have to understand that in telecommunications stuff, almost every single CPU is going to be a modified version for embedded use, including these two. These don't have floating point units and they don't have memory management units, which makes them basically useless in a regular computer. Not that you could use an i960 in a regular computer, but if you found a Motorola 68040, which you could pull out and put into an old Macintosh or Amiga, it won't work because they don't have the memory management unit. So that's something to watch out for. If you're thinking of pulling them for use in a computer system, you usually can't get away with that. They use the stripped down embedded versions. One final thing as we go, in case you're wondering how they're able to fit this much programmable logic onto a very densely packed board, that's how. 12 layers, not cheap.